What's the very first fanfiction you came up with? I'm not talking about the first thing you wrote and posted, though if you wrote and published the very first idea you had, more power to you. What's the first extra-canonical story idea that you allowed to percolate in your brain? Was it something you still look fondly on, or was it an unmitigated disaster? For me, I imagined a Sailor Moon series where Usagi's evil twin sister comes down from space, and they battle each other with Dragon Ball Z attacks. It was basically a hodgepodge of all the media I was consuming at that moment. At the time, I thought it was super cool. In retrospect, if I had tried to write it, I probably would have been smote by some deity. Credit to Reddit user The Sound Defense for starting this thread on the fanfiction subreddit. And let's go read some answers. I was 9 when Mulan came out, and I remember thinking, why can't she be Mulan on some days and then be Ping on other days? And I created multiple scenarios in my head where that was exactly the case. Mind you, this was the late 90s and I was at a private Christian school. I had no idea that some people were gender fluid or non-binary. And not me, but when my niece was 4, she would tell me stories about Darth Vader and Yoda becoming best friends, getting ice cream together, and holding hands on the swing set. I made a Sonic the Hedgehog original character. Her name was Jane. Don't think it ever actually stood for anything, but the initialism was important. And she was an anthropomorphic cat. I created some stories about her hanging out with the main Sonic gang, but eventually wrote her out and just continued the adventures of Sonic and his friends, because Jane was a boring character. This has never seen the light of day until now, but basically Super Mario Bros, but I inserted an original character, which is just Peach's twin, who is purple, who has a gun, who is also a cat. Keep in mind, this was at least a decade before Super Mario 3D World was announced. She was also a cyborg. A Victorious and Venom crossover, with Cat as the Venom's host. It was originally going to be Tori, but I wanted to see how an innocent type like Cat would be influenced by a creature such as Venom. I didn't have a lot of creativity back then. This was 2019 after the Venom movie released, so I was copying the events of the movie bar for bar with minor changes. I discontinued and deleted the story, but it was the spark that triggered more ideas. Back in my Brony phase, I decided to make a crappy romance fic between Spike and this changeling dude, can't remember his name, where Twilight Sparkle was trying to find out who Spike was seeing because the changeling had taken the form of a douche called Prince Blueblood when they kissed. It was really dumb and cringy, but it did kickstart my interest in writing fanfics. My best friend at the time and I were isekai'd into the Naruto world and were like, heck yeah, we're gonna be ninjas, let's see what I can do! And just made up random things about shadow and light techniques, random scenes from other anime or Naruto. There was just random things and there were tons of song references. It's still up as a reminder for myself. When I was in like 6th grade, I was obsessed with warrior cats. My very first fanfiction I was able to get on paper was about Hollyleaf's spirit speaking with Firestar's spirit immediately after Hollyleaf had died. Although it definitely didn't make sense in canon, considering Firestar wouldn't have been dead at that point, I still hold it pretty dear to my heart, cause it isn't half bad. It was a Sanders Sides fanfic medieval AU. There were regular humans, but also animal hybrids. It was shipping Virgil, a low-class spider hybrid peasant with a sick mom and an absentee father, and Roman, the stuck-up human prince of the kingdom. I still think of it fondly. I was 8 years old, and I imagined if Bella got over Edward and New Moon and got with Jacob. It was epic. They had little wolf babies. A crossover where Elijah from the Vampire Diaries universe seduced pretty much all of the Bridgerton family over a few decades. What if my fandom's giant evil killer space robots held office meetings where they discussed their genocidal plans for the galaxy? What would those be like? I was 11. I had just had the flu and binged Doctor Who for the 2 weeks I was sick. My very first fanfiction was a self-insert original character who had cancer. I did not and do not have a serious illness. I have no idea why 11-year-old me did that, and was rescued by the Doctor. The 11th Doctor, to be specific, even though my favorite at the time was the 9th Doctor. I still cringe looking back, but I was very invested in it at the time. Ever After High plus Monster High plus Nightmare Before Christmas crossover made Santana Claus, the daughter of Jack as Santa Claus. She was best friends with C.A. Cupid, and they bonded over the feeling of not belonging in either school fully, but embracing their roles. I want to try writing it again now, actually. I can't even remember how young I was, maybe 6 or 7, and every night as I fell asleep, I would add to a story about me and Luke Skywalker working together in the Return of the Jedi era. I remember particularly enjoying extending on the training in Dagobah. As an 8-year-old, I watched the dancer Ula fall into the Rancor pit in Return of the Jedi, and immediately, well, after I'd calmed down a bit, started imagining ways for her to escape once the camera was off of her. That ended up being one of the major pop culture experiences of my early childhood, and some 25 years later, I was reminded of it strongly enough to finally write it down. I have a series of Fix-It fixed for her now, and I'm quite proud of all of them. A fic in which the champs from Breath of the Wild also survived. While I look back on it fondly, it is absolutely a disaster, but it's my disaster. A Sims 2 fanfiction where the Strange Town clone of Bella Goth met the Curious Brothers and stayed with them for a while, eventually getting kidnapped by the Beakers, leading to her breaking herself and nervous subject out. I honestly still like the idea. When I was 9 or so, I made up these stories in my head where Hermione would be the main character, who lived in the Forbidden Forest, and she was super powerful. She was like an urban legend. Then I fantasized that Harry dies, and Hermione finds his daughter in Muggle foster care and takes her in. Oh, and she was a Mary Sue here too. For me, it was when Overwatch first came out. The game had loads of really cool and unique characters, but not enough lore to really flesh them out, so I started to fill in the blanks. I don't write for that fandom anymore, but it was a cool scene for a while. The first one I actually started writing was a super rough Pokemon fic involving Jessie and James, aka rocket shipping. I was obsessed with these two as a tween. It was a super long, fragmented fic that had them fall for each other over the course of the series. Then, at some point, I think I didn't like that the stakes were so low, so I just added some wonky lore that allowed Pokemon trainers to fight like ninjas in Naruto would, but using Pokemon attacks instead of jutsu. For some reason, he was my favorite, James was just super OP using it. There were world-ending threats he battled, and the whole thing became a huge mess. 8-year-old me had a self-insert character for the old-school She-Ra show my mom made me watch. Think Princess Rainbow Powerpuff Girl. I was a small child and imagined all of my favorite cartoon characters living in my house. I would document their adventures. Literally this huge amalgamation self-insert crossover where all of my favorite characters and I lived together and shenanigans ensued. Fandom specific, I had this really Avatar one that never saw the light of day because it was super out of character and it really had no point. Basically, it was just Azula on Ember Island with Chan and a bunch of original characters. I filled a whole notebook with that, complete with drawings and glitter and everything. Never posting it because it's cringe as heck, but it made me really happy back then, so it has a special place in my heart, and I am keeping the notebook. It was the typical OP twin of Naruto who also had Ichigo's hollow mask for some reason. That was more like a portal opens one day and another Naruto just falls on top of Naruto and tells him he's from an alternate timeline. But now that I really think about it, my first could have been the Angry Birds comic, which was basically Angry Birds Space except smaller, atrocious grammar, and horrible drawings. Not really sure, but I was the kid with a long-running story I'd play out in the basement by myself, where I was an admiral on the Enterprise, and Spock and Bones were my besties. Kirk was an annoyance at best. Oh, and Sulu was my fencing partner. That went on for years. I was a literal child who didn't even know what fanfiction was, or knew what anything was at all, really. But I made a Dora the Explorer fanfiction in my head where the cow becomes a villain, and Dora has to defeat them or something. I don't really remember, it was a very long time ago. Technically, the basis of my childhood fantasies were Shark Boy and Lava Girl fanfiction. I would play pretend on my own planet as my own self-insert original character superhero, Tornado Girl. I count my first fandom as Harry Potter, and 10-year-old me pretended to be Harry's daughter Lily, sending letters home about computers. It was a crossover between Ruby and Far Cry 3. Basically, the main cast of Ruby was somehow transported to Rook Island. Somehow, I didn't get that far, and got help from another American who was stuck on the island, and while the main story was going on, in the background the Ruby cast were trying to help the rebels and escape the island. I was like 11 and watching a scene of Kagome being jealous of Kikyo and thought, you know, what if Kagome died saving Kikyo? What would Inuyasha think then, huh? I have been a fan of toxic and dramatic scenarios since day one. I did a lot of original works when I was young, if you could call it that, until I was 12 when I came up with an idea for the most egregious Harry Potter fanfic to ever grace the earth. I think it was a love triangle between Harry, Malfoy, and Hermione where they were trying to get Harry to date them. And Malfoy almost killed Harry because he was a tsundere and weird like that, and he basically verbally and emotionally abused Harry, but then was like, "It's all 'cause I love you," and Harry was like, "This is normal and correct." And then Hermione was all sad and dated Ginny because I hated straight ships for some reason. I wrote my first, a Star Wars fic, back in about 1982 or so. I was around 10 years old. It was awful in comparison to what I write today. I still have it. It's written on binder paper and I haven't read it in decades, but I don't have the heart to chuck it out. It's hilarious in its awfulness. Human Pokemon trainer and a Mewtwo falling in love with each other. I was a very strange child. I will not say it. Might get put in jail for 25 years if I would. Thank you to my Patreon members, my Little Ruse, Seltzer Fountain Man, Kuski55, Logan, Fallen Vexen, Sam, Puff, I Am a Noodle, and John Huang. Thank you so much for your extra support. I'm incredibly grateful, and again, thankful, and I hope you guys know how awesome you are. The same goes to my YouTube channel members, my Mini Ruse, AD, Taylor Thompson, and Schmidt. Again, thank you so much for giving me this little bit of extra support. You guys are really amazing, and again, thank you. And last but not least, thank you so much just to everyone who watched. You are the backbone of my channel. Let me know if you remember what your first fanfiction was. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. I'll see you in the next video.